Rolled a hit. I hit. How much HP does this monster have again? Alright, guess we'll keep going. We've all had them. Those combat sessions that seem to just go on and on with no end in sight. The purpose of this video is to give you some tips to spice up your combat session and make sure that everyone at the table stays engaged. If you like role-playing game content, make sure to hit subscribe so you know every time that I put out a new video. So like most RPG players, I started playing Dungeons & Dragons. That was my first role-playing game. And I often had encounters in which the combat seemed really slow or just took a while to turn through rounds. So the boring and lengthy combat that I encountered from time to time in D&D was one of the main reasons that I started to look into other systems. But later I learned that it wasn't necessarily the system that was the problem, but some of the things during combat just made it unnecessarily lengthy and didn't really make for an exciting experience at the table. D&D definitely has the capacity to have amazing combat sessions, and hopefully some of these tips will help you either for D&D or any other role-playing game system that you like to play. When it comes to combat, I think there are really three main categories that will help enhance the experience and make sure everyone's engaged, and those are pre-work, description, and environment. So let's start with pre-work. There's a little bit of work that will help the whole combat session go more smoothly that you as a game master can implement. The first is making sure you read your monster stats ahead of time. So I know sometimes you have to improvise and you won't have a choice in that case, but if you are planning a little bit and know there are certain monsters that are going to come up in your session, make sure you read their stats and abilities before the session. You are familiar with how they work, and you're familiar with any spells or any special things that they might be able to do. So you're not spending time staring at a book, making sure that you know exactly what they can do and figuring out how they're going to react to certain things. You've already done that work and you know how they're going to react. That's going to make the gameplay a lot more smooth. The other thing I recommend doing is just pre-work right before a combat session. So this is during the game, but before combat starts, make sure that everyone at the table, all your players know what initiative order is. That way they know who's first and they know where in the track that they're going to be acting. They can pre-plan a little bit of what they're going to do so that when it gets to their turn, they're not spending 10 or 15 minutes deciding what they're going to do. They've already thought ahead of what their options are and when they're going to be acting. Also, if it helps, you can put a little bit of a tracker on your Game Master screen to know what order they're going to go in. I know a lot of people use note cards to say, this monster is player 1, player 2, player 3, player 4 monsters, so they know every time this is the initiative order, and that can be really helpful as well. And the other part that's under the pre-work category is music. This is completely optional, but some people do like to use music to spice up combat and make it more engaging at the table, but that does take a little bit of pre-work, making sure that you've chosen appropriate music for the combat and that you're ready to go to press that play button when the combat ensues. So the next category is setting or environment, which is the place in which combat is occurring. So this can either be a tavern, forest, a dungeon, wherever it is. I want to make sure that the Game Master includes certain objects that can be used for player creativity. So in a tavern, an easy thing is to make sure that there's lots of tables, there's a bar, there's a balcony, there's a stage maybe. Make sure there are things that the players can interact with and make it combat a little bit more interesting. Or if you're in a forest, there's certain fallen down trees that can be used for cover or whatever your game system uses. Make sure there's objects and environment key pieces that people can interact with, both players and NPCs. Which transitions well into the NPC side of things. Make sure that you are embodying your NPCs and that they're reacting appropriately, which means they're going to have genuine reactions to the players. If they just get hit really hard, they're not going to be happy about that, and they're probably going to target that person that just hit them really hard. So make sure you think about how the NPCs would be reacting in combat situations like they're an actual person. Okay, so now you have a bunch of objects in your setting and you have NPCs interacting with these objects and having real reactions to your players. But you also have to remember that the environment can be a little crazy sometimes. Maybe it's thunderstorming out, or maybe there's a blizzard, or maybe there's rocks falling or trees falling. The environment can have a big role in what happens during combat, so if there are different conditions as a result of a thunderstorm or a rock slide, something that would interact with how people have to maneuver during combat, it can make for a more interesting fight and keep everyone thinking and having to problem solve. So the third major category is description, and this one is a big one. It can really help bring your combat to life and make it so everyone at the table can kind of visualize what's going on and make it more fun. You enter a forest and there's a giant insect in front of you. Go. You enter a forest and it's oddly quiet. The sun is shining through the trees and there's a stillness to the air. As you move forward, you suddenly feel a rumbling behind you. As you whip around, a giant insect bursts through the ground. 100 different legs and all the slime coming down its body, and its mouth is wide open with more teeth than legs. Go. But the important note about description is it has to be a balance. If you're spending every single action describing in depth what that action looks and feels like, it's going to lengthen the combat significantly. So you have to kind of pick and choose what are the best moments to describe and engage your players. Often what this is very heavy in the beginning, the first couple actions, make sure they really are getting into the setting and you're seeing and describing all of the senses. And then a little bit sprinkled in the middle, and make sure at the end you really get that finishing blow. You get that whole story at the end of what's happening. So let me talk a little bit more about what I mean when I say describe things. When you're in this situation, you have to think about the actual characters and what they're experiencing and seeing. So if they have a sword that they're slicing and dicing enemies with, and they hit an enemy very far into their torso, you can describe how that feels as the sword is slicing through the flesh and there's resistance and the blood is starting to come out the side. Side note, you should make sure that your players are comfortable with gore before you go too in depth. But if they are, making sure you take the time to describe what that might feel like and look like. And also smell. So some of the other senses, making sure you smell, taste, anything that you can help to envision that they're there and help make that setting come to life. The other thing you can do is describe the emotional state of the NPCs. So you shouldn't really describe what the PCs are feeling. They should really be handling that situation. But the NPCs, they might be fighting in desperation, or they might be totally confident and just willy-nilly running around because they have all the confidence in the world that they can take this party. Whatever the case may be, making sure that the players know how the NPCs are acting can help bring the combat to life. And my final note on description is that it's not all on the Game Master. Players should be encouraged to describe, if they would like to, of whatever their characters are doing. One way to help encourage players to describe is by asking them questions. So let's say you're not sure of something like your axe that you're using. You can ask them, oh, what kind of size axe is that? Is there a certain color to it? Is there an engraving on the side? I'm just curious about the description of the weapon. You can use that to add some description, and by asking players different questions, they'll be more encouraged in the future to describe things. And finally, the thing that I like to do is make sure that if they're the one that's giving the final blow, that they have the option to describe this scene. Often it's very rewarding and fulfilling to be able to finally kill that monster. So if they would like to describe how that's happening, that can be really fun for the players as well. So there are my top tips on how to spice up combat a little bit, making sure that you do a little bit of pre-work, you add objects to the environment, and make sure that you have different aspects of the environment come to life to help the combat move along. And then finally, utilizing description and making sure you have that balance to help bring the combat come to life and really encourage everyone at the table to feel like they're there and they're experiencing what's happening during this session. Please let me know if you have any top tips for combat sessions down below in the comments. And here are some more videos on role-playing games. Hit that subscribe button if you'd like to learn more. And thank you so much for watching. Bye.